Usually on this channel, we're talking about the 1800s, corsets, calling cards, cholera. But today, I am officially expanding our jurisdiction of what a period drama is. We need to talk about rivals. And specifically, we need to accept the fact that the 1980s is now a full-blown period drama. Welcome back to the Rumor Mill, which is the podcast here on Regency Rumors. Today, we are blowing the definition of period dramas wide open because Rivals feels like a period drama, okay? If you put aside the sexiness for just 2 seconds, because people are going to be like, what? You're equating this with what? But people did things in all different times of history. This feels like I'm watching something like Regency era in terms of the world that they've created, in terms of visually how satisfying this series looks, the social codes, the power structures that are recognizable in this that you can also see within something like a Regency series. This feels like a completely different time because it is. We're just swapping out corsets for shoulder pads. And so watching this just makes me feel reminiscent for a time period that is no longer. But I want to kind of define why I think this is now a period drama era, because it's in the past, but it's far enough away that it doesn't feel recognizable to any of us anymore. Just to let you know, because this is a podcast, you can access it by other means than YouTube, Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. In a period drama, I feel like the aesthetic distinctions between modern television and something that's supposed to be in the past should be really obvious to us. It should be easy from like a single frame to tell you that you are immediately not in the present when you watch something that's a period drama. I personally get annoyed sometimes with the color grading of some modern period dramas because it feels too tied to other shows. I've talked a lot about how Disney does this with all of their shows. They have a very specific color grading that they do with shows like Shard Lake and The Artful Dodger that look visually almost exactly the same in the kind of colors that are in there and I don't know how to explain this correctly, but like the aesthetics to other ABC shows like The Good Doctor or Grey's Anatomy or like Chicago Fire. I shouldn't feel like The Artful Dodger, which is set in 1860s Australia, that the color grading is very similar to The Good Doctor or Grey's Anatomy. There should be something about this that feels like it's in a different time. And I'm not saying that I want like a washed out period drama, because you guys know I hate that as well. But what I will say is that there should be something about the way it's shot and the way that the colors are on screen that are different. And I feel like enough people have complained about how Disney do some period dramas that Rivals does not fall into this trap. Or maybe it does. It's just that it fits the aesthetic that Disney already has. But no, I do think that there's something visually different that feels in the past. It's a very like warm 80s feel to the visuals in Rivals. And immediately it feels like this series isn't in the present. Also, we should be able to see that the social codes are a bit different. The way people navigate power and sex and status and information should feel a bit foreign to us in a way. And there are many things about the 80s that are still true about today, but there's plenty that are not. And we need to be able to feel that in the storytelling. But to me, one of the biggest things is that period dramas should feel human. They should feel close enough to our experiences as human beings to feel familiar. Period dramas are not documentaries. If we are watching them and it feels that way, then filmmakers haven't done a good job of entertaining us. When we romanticize the Regency era, what are we actually romanticizing? We're romanticizing the Empire waistlines and the soft curls as people dance around a ballroom and the low light from the candle flickers. We're not romanticizing the lack of plumbing. We barely see people interact in that way at all. We're not thinking about how women deal with the time of the month, right? There are some very fluffy Regency era series and films, and there is some very realistic ones out there. And not in any of them are they not romanticized with a very curated aesthetic slice of that era. The beautiful part and the part that translates well on screen. And Rivals does a great job of knowing how to do this in the exact same way for the 80s. We romanticize the shoulder pads and the sequins and the blocked bright colors and the hair and the gold jewelry. Most period dramas are not trying to romanticize the Cold War anxiety or the AIDS crisis. We take the beautiful, vivid, loud, unapologetic part of the decade, some of the decadence and the comfortable fashion, and we put it on screen, and it works because the 80s was genuinely one of the most like visually distinctive decades of the 20th century. Rivals does a great job of creating a fantasy version of Britain that never really existed, but certainly doesn't exist anymore. And I think that's exactly why we're obsessed with it. I think we're going to start getting a lot more 80s period dramas, and so it'll be interesting to see how other series handles this. But I feel like Rivals does something really clever that a lot of 80s set shows don't bother to do, and it is that it respects the era enough to be very selective about it, about how it's portrayed on screen. On the music side of things, I really compared this to something like House of Guinness, which pulls in modern sounds to make the period more palatable to a 2020s audience. And I made a whole video on that and how it feels like Netflix is trying to make period dramas like cool and edgy and sexy, but in a way that's so overt that I think it overrides the storytelling that they are trying to do. There was some really cool Irish language music in there, and they used the Irish language, which was really exciting. I don't think that's been done for a mainstream period drama, certainly. But in a lot of ways, it felt like to me that House of Guinness was trying to copy period dramas like Peaky Blinders, which love Peaky Blinders, but now that it's over, it is starting to become outdated. I remember when Jordan and I got married that there was this trend for like Peaky Blinders weddings for the men, for them to wear like the flat caps and to wear like three-piece suits where the waistcoat, like the buttons were off to the side, because I remember that being, I think in one or two of the seasons of Peaky Blinders, and then wanting to have that kind of phased haircut on the side. And when we went to look for suits, I remember the sales guy telling us, he was like, you know, Peaky Blinders is trendy right now, those kind of suits, but it's going to look outdated. And 10, 20 years from now, when you're looking back at your wedding photos, you're going to be like, oh yeah, we were obsessed with Peaky Blinders back then and like loved that show, but you know, times have moved on, so you don't want to lean into that aesthetic unless it's something that you already really like for yourself. And in a lot of ways, that's the way I felt like the music was with House of Guinness. That kind of like plunky rock pop sound has been in so many period dramas at this point that it feels no longer unique to any of them. And I would much rather that style of music be left out of most of them going forward so that they can have their own unique sound to them. Rivals does not do that. It is extremely careful about which 80s music that it chooses to put in the show. It does not throw in every recognizable hit to trigger a nostalgia reflex for audiences, or include an updated, more modern version of an 80s song. But it curates a world that makes living in that time feel genuinely cool on its own terms. I don't know how best to describe it other than to say like the music isn't winking at you, like it's not saying like remember this, or like this is meant to be a throwback to this era, but it's supposed to feel like modern and cool. What it does is go, hey, you are here now in the 80s with us, and the music that we pick is going to make you feel that way, like you are in the present with them. To me, that's a completely different relationship with an audience, and it's what separates a show that's set in a period from a show that actually is trying to make you feel like you are in that setting. The costuming also follows that logic, with having the characters look like they are really wearing clothing from the time period. And I love the prioritization of the comfort in the clothing. With Golden Girls, every single episode, these women looked absolutely incredible. They looked like put together and polished and stylish, but there was also like an ease to what they were wearing. The clothes looked like they got a nice quality to them and like an effortlessness. There was such a playfulness and an eclecticness and a generosity to 80s fashion with the big shapes and the natural fabrics and silhouettes that worked with women's bodies for them to be comfortable in different spaces. It has that like wearability that I've talked about with Regency silhouettes, where you're not watching the show feeling like, oh my gosh, like that looks so uncomfortable. And that's like, don't comfort me, historical corset girlies. I understand that a well-fitted corset could be comfortable for women in like the Victorian era, but it's also something that it looks like day to day that you're gonna lay around on the couch a lot less. Like I've worn plenty of corsets before. I do find them comfortable, but I also know what it's like to be in sweatpants, and there is something different about it. And I just feel like that visually it's nice to watch something where I think that women's comfort are being considered in the fashion. And I feel like both in the 80s and in the Regency era that was certainly true for a lot of at least day-to-day clothing. Now, the 80s did have some genuinely chaotic fashion moments, the kind that if you did put them on screen, your audience would be laughing at the characters rather than rooting for them. And I think sometimes it could be very distracting depending on what you put on screen. But Rivals doesn't really go there with a lot of these costumes. All of them are pretty safe for the time period. It picks the version of 80s dressing that is aspirational, that feels kind of like vintage and cool today, and leans on some of the bright colors and the like glamour and the flowy silhouettes, but without like tipping into complete parody of like neon colors, if you get what I mean. Most period dramas, it's really fun when you feel like that you'd want to wear what they are wearing, and I feel like Rivals does this really well. It makes me want to go out and get like a high-waisted pair of mom jeans and a like suede jacket. Taggie's a good example of this, to be honest with you. Her costumes never go too far or are too like over the top for the 80s. It's very much stuff that I feel like a lot of young people would enjoy wearing today, that we even see some of like the Gen Zers wearing, with comfortable sweaters and jeans that are rolled up at the bottom, those kind of like longer milkmaid dresses. Speaking of Taggie, this is a sister video to a long form essay that I did about age gap relationships, and I think I've changed my thumbnail now, but I go through different examples of age gap relationships like Jane Eyre, Sense and Sensibility, Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. Poldark, if you can believe it or not, had a big age gap, at least in the books. Demelza was 13 when she moved in with Ross, and I think 17 when she married him. I don't think in the series that they highlighted this. I think they brought their ages closer together. But I talk about why these age gap romances are really tantalizing, why people find them exciting, but also why they can be really icky. And so yeah, if you're interested in deep diving way more into like the scandalous side of Taggie and Rupert Campbell Black's relationship, then that video is for you. There are some funny examples when women are in tight skirts or bras that kind of lift you up, higher heels, but for the most part, nobody wants to watch characters suffer in historically accurate stays for 90 minutes. They want the fantasy of the era and for people to feel like they're naturally moving through it in a way that feels real. And Rivals gives you the fantasy of the 80s without betraying the truth of that. The tightrope from making historical clothing look aspirational to modern audiences and yet also like comfortable and believable is really hard to do. And I feel like a lot of shows don't actually pull it off. I think Outlander is a good example of one that doesn't pull it off. There's loads of beautiful costumes in that show, but I never feel like any of the characters, at least the female characters, that they look like they're really like living in that era in the sense that they're like comfortable and this is the way that they feel all of the time. Don't shoot me, Outlander fans. But I do feel like Rivals is one that pulls it off really well with the 80s. I hate to say it, guys, but I think the most period drama-esque part of this show is the fact that there are no cell phones and no social media. I feel like the 80s is the best of both worlds. There are landlines and car phones. And it's not like a completely silent world. Like, people can reach each other and reach each other quite quickly, but there is no device in anyone's pocket that like vibrates every 40 seconds, or like no notifications that people are checking where we have to like watch the boxes pop up on the screen. There's no one waiting for the public's reaction on TikTok to like a news story that broke. There's no comment section. And I just love the way it makes it feel like people are super present for some reason. And I know that there's modern shows where like people are obviously doing things and being together and there's less phones than there probably would be in people's faces in everyday life. But I think just knowing that the cell phones, you know, with the internet are not available to these people, that they have to like live out a lot of the scandal on screen, or like watching it at a certain time of night, or being in the room with one another and like waiting on a phone call. There's something about that just makes it feel like so immediate and exciting. There is an adorable cozy murder mystery called Murder at Evensong that I think is on BritBox or Acorn, one of the two, and it is really clever with how it handles I think it's the 1980s or the 1990s, because it feels like it handles that kind of in-between world where phones exist, but they're tethered to walls and there's no like beep bop boop on like screens that people are doing while they're trying to like figure out who the murderer is. And so it just feels like it's the best of both worlds. Like, they're able to call somebody very quickly if they need something, but also there's not these phones that we feel like these people could have access to all the answers immediately. You know, people are popping around to each other's houses unannounced, which I really wish that we would do more of that these days. You know, people have to knock on doors and linger in corridors. So this features a priest in it who starts poking his nose at the investigation, but it doesn't feel ridiculous that he's doing that in this setting compared to today. It's really hard for a normal person to be involved in a like crime scene investigation in fiction in the same way. Now, like it feels like you have to do a lot of story work in order for it to be natural for them to be there. And in the 80s and 90s, well, really from the 50s and like 40s and 50s and Agatha Christie stories, I just feel like there's a reason why that's like the golden era of crime novels, because it's just enough structure with the police to like catch the killer and for clues to be found and there to be some sort of an order, but not enough of the strict processes of the police and the forensics that we have today, that someone who is an everyday person couldn't come in and be involved in the police work in some way. And there's something like just really like cozy and wholesome to that. And I'm really loving that the 1980s is now being included in kind of that cozy ecosystem along with other shows like Father Brown and Miss Marple. I love how much these people are like making moves. They're having dinners. They're having affairs. They're making deals. So the power only flows one way, really, with these television people. They're the ones that have the voice, because everyday people can't go on Amazon and just buy a mic. Now, there's certainly more audience interaction than had ever been before in history by this time, but there are not millions of people that can quit back in real time. You know, they can't tweet at the show. They can't start a Reddit thread. They can't post a TikTok response that goes viral. The feedback loop that we now live inside like 24 hours a day simply didn't exist. And I feel like we find these characters intoxicating, like partly because of that. All of these people have the power when it comes to reaching the outside public, and they behave in crazy ways because of that. The entire engine of this show is the fight over television franchises, specifically the fight over who gets to control what people watch. If you were living in the 80s, then you knew that there, I think, was only 3 television channels. 3. If you controlled one of those franchises, you controlled access to millions of people. If you were on TV, then like you were seen and you were known by so many more people than necessarily a lot of actors are today, or a lot of media people are today. The characters in Rivals understand this very intimately, and that is why they are fighting so viciously over it. These people are fighting for cultural dominance. And if you're able to get on one of these TV shows, you've got it. Now, today, everyone's a creator, everyone's broadcasting something. There are no like gatekeepers in the way that there used to be. And in a lot of ways, that's a good thing, but it also means that the kind of power these characters are fighting over really doesn't exist in the same way anymore. There's something super exciting about watching people like vie for control of something that they know is going to have massive cultural impact, right? Now it just feels like the information like comes to us from different sources, and it's just like this bombardment, and it doesn't really matter who reports it first, and in a lot of ways we never know that, right? It's just that these different like sites are putting out information, or they're putting out entertainment, and we watch it when we want to watch it, and we comment on it when we want to, and it's just completely different. We aren't necessarily sitting around waiting for a specific person to tell us things in mass. And I think that massive difference, that change in how we digest media, is one of the reasons why the 80s is now a period drama. These people are not just being mean to one another at like dinner parties just to be mean and for it to create drama, although it does create drama, and a lot of times it's very delicious. It's that I feel like the stakes in something like this translates to a 2020s audience as something that is historical. Them fighting over these TV franchises, it's a power structure that we recognize, but we no longer live inside that world, which is why it feels so like romanticized or so in the past. The 80s is a period drama era because how we function in the world has changed so much. I also feel like that's what gives this show an extraordinary sense of presence, though, because like the stakes feel like it's so in real time. If you miss the news cycle, you missed it. If one franchise reports on something before the other, then like one is a winner and one is a loser. If the evening broadcast goes wrong, there is no algorithm to bury it. And I do feel like there's something really intoxicating about watching people know that they have that level of power. And it does feel like the stakes are so much higher than they are now. In a lot of ways, it feels like it is of a time, and it's of a place where people aren't going to be canceled for having affairs with their co-anchors. But I think there's something incredibly like messy relationship-wise with a show like Rivals that people have been craving with an ensemble cast, and boy does it deliver. Rivals does a great job at the ensemble cast in a way that Bridgerton does not do, and I have complained about this multiple times, but I think it's because they are trying to balance both at one time. They want to have central characters and side characters all at the same time, and for them to kind of dip in and out of the importance of the main couple and the ensemble cast also being important. And I think they did not get the balance of that right. And had they have just decided to stick with the ensemble cast thing and have the couple here and there, I think people would have been less annoyed, but it feels like it's something that they tried to implement in these later seasons more, and it's not gone down right. And had they done what Rivals has done with giving these characters more complete story arcs, then I think the stories would feel a bit richer, but as they are, they've got a bit of a problem on their hands. I love the fact that we've got multiple couples and multiple betrayals and multiple slow burns all happening at once. It makes it more engaging and exciting and doesn't make it feel like some of these people are just filling up screen time. Jilly Cooper's books were the Game of Thrones of romance. You have 20 characters all intertwining, all vying for power or love or revenge. I wish there was more books like this outside of fantasy settings that had that like ensemble feel to it, but there's not a lot of like romances that I can even think of that do it in that way. Modern romance has largely gone in the opposite direction, like what I was saying with Bridgerton, with like one couple or one or two point of views. Rivals restores that sense of like narrative abundance. There's always a story to follow. There's another relationship to invest in. I love how this feels like it's a bit of a soap opera, but on steroids. There is a part of me that feels like I would enjoy reading the books, but there's also another part of me that has heard there's some problematic characters in this, but there's really problematic characters in this show. So I don't know. One of the things that Rivals does that contemporary drama often struggles with is letting morally complicated characters be morally complicated without the narrative like rushing to punish them or redeem them on a certain like schedule. The 80s setting functions as a bit of like a permission slip to let these people just get on with being terrible in a lot of different ways. And as like awful as that kind of seems, I think people are really interested in seeing how things play out without cancel culture, in a way that these people will get their comeuppance without like the general public playing into it. That them having a character like Tony Battingham having a downfall is going to be more about the people close to him doing that than the public doing it to him, if that makes sense. In a lot of ways, it's a great way that it highlights that like men in power get away with things without any consequences. It definitely feels like it leans into like that 50s and 60s work setting. You know, the social codes were different, the consequences were different. The show can explore those power imbalances and messy desire and ethically, like questionable behavior with a bit of nuance and show you the consequences that are involved with something like that. And I feel like that is very period drama-esque, to be honest with you. And I feel that kind of like letting them get on with it in a way that we see period dramas let like awful Victorians or people in the colonial era get away with their actions and, then have to watch like victims persevere in a different way, or for laws to change, or people to finally be accepted in a new circle or a new place, or they're fleeing from something that's dangerous because of a war. Rivals lets the 80s be the 80s, the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's not a defense of those kind of behaviors, but it is an observation about what period drama has always done, which it creates that safe container for exploring the things that we find uncomfortable in the present. The historical distance gives us permission to be able to explore the things that were good and exciting and fashionable and also terrible about a time in the past. But I feel like even with this being made by Disney, because they just like throw it at you and they're like, here's the 80s and this is the way people in these industries behaved, it allows for audiences to indulge in like the forbidden with like age gap romances and affairs and off-color jokes. But I do feel like the show is going to give the characters who are truly awful and who like cheat for sport or exploit others, like they are going to get their consequences. And the like sweet characters like Taggie, the show gives them grace and will give them a bit of grace or enjoyment through the show because the audience want to see them win. It does allow us to root for the bad thing because it's happening to the right people, i.e. the bad people. It's a moral complexity that we often lose in modern settings because some shows are too afraid of the optics. But in period dramas, they let the characters breathe and just be who they are. I'm thinking of other period dramas like Mad Men that does the same, where they just let these characters be awful and smoke themselves to death. The 80s in Rivals is aspirational in a very specific, very class-coded way. The houses are big, the parties are lavish, the careers feel possible for some of these characters as well. There's a version of the 80s that, it's not universal clearly, but the version that the show is dramatizing where middle-class prosperity felt within reach and ambition and like hard working was rewarded with people like going up in pay or having a new like work opportunity or getting a big bonus. And luxury eventually felt like a reasonable destination for people like Danny Dyer's character rather than just a fantasy or like, only a few select people can get it. And I understand that we are talking about the gentry class down in the Cotswolds. So I'm aware that these people are already kind of elite in a way, but it does feel like that they're showing like a mixture of characters who are struggling financially and ones that have been able to make it from nothing. And in this time period, that feels really attainable. I do think that it's so funny that the O'Hara family, though, are staying in the same house that Poldark was set as like the grand estate. And then the show is being like, oh no, the O'Haras have no money. They're really struggling financially. And yet it's this like mansion that today is worth like millions of dollars. And I think even back in the 80s was very expensive to live in. And I understand with these people being in television that they maybe would have had more money than most, but I do think that is one part of the show that perhaps doesn't line up correctly in my mind. I'm like, okay, so they're financially struggling, but they've also bought this massive historic home. Okay. I feel like there is something so nostalgic about the 80s that is going to make it the next like big period drama era because everything feels attainable. Like the houses and retirement funds and stability and a career that could fund your life. And you could buy a lake house on a teacher's salary, like the things that are just no longer on the table. But at least it's very satisfying and exciting to watch these people be able to get that stuff on screen. So here's where I land. The 80s is a period drama era. Rivals is the proof of this. For a lot of people, this will feel too recent for them to be a period drama. Either they've lived through it or it feels like, this is too much our parents' generation. That's not really a period drama. But every era eventually becomes the past. Eventually, the life that we are living right now is going to be a time period that they can put in a period drama. And while it feels crazy to finally accept that this show is a period drama, I think finally accepting that is allowing me to enjoy it a lot more and to compare it to other shows that have very specific frameworks within the time period that it's in. As a historian, you guys are never gonna catch me saying like, oh, I wish we could go back to this time when this and this, because there are so many things about the past that would not be good for us humans. And so much of what happens in Rivals is proof of that. But with us living through our own situations right now, I at least feel like I would enjoy throwing my phone out the window and people only being able to contact me by landline. Well, that is it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching The Rumor Mill. What do you think? Do you think that the 80s is a period drama? Is it not a period drama? If you don't think it is, tell me why. I would love to know your opinion. I love shows set in the 80s, but if you know of any period dramas that they're being made now, but they are set in the 80s, then I would love to know about that. Please put them in the comments below because I feel like I want to watch more of this time period. Thank you so much for listening, watching with me today, and going back to the 80s. Now I'm gonna go watch me some Murder, She Wrote.